I want to begin tonight by starting with the Devonian Period. Really, the story starts there. Not that carbon sequestering started then. That actually started about 1 million years earlier, but certainly carbon sequestering was in high gear during this period. What is carbon sequestering? It's really the separating of carbon from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and locking that carbon into the tissues of plants and animals. And this actually did a tremendous amount to change the planet from a very high carbon atmosphere with steamy, shallow seas into a planet that we know more, that is more like today, that is hospitable to higher life forms. And during that time, if you know the process, the vegetation basically dies out and becomes part of a shale deposit called the Devonian Shale, of which the Marcellus Shale is a part. And then the tissues, of course, decay and then forms the gas, the natural gas that we're talking about this evening. This is a map that shows the basic deposit parameters. And you can see it really covers a wide swath of area, starting even down into Alabama, Tennessee, up into New York. The Marcellus Shale is a substrate of that, and that is signified by the brown area. And that's roughly the area that we're talking about this evening. It's estimated that there's about 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in this deposit. And at present level of technology, about 10% of that, or about 50 trillion cubic feet, could be recovered for a total approximate value of $1 trillion. So a lot of money is at stake when we're talking about it. It's actually suggested to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, gas deposit in the nation. The U.S., just as a point of reference, consumes about 25 trillion cubic feet of natural gas per year. So put in this framework and perspective, this deposit will supply us, the nation, with natural gas to satisfy our consumption for about 2 years. Now, the drilling will last a lot longer because there's multiple sources of this gas, but just kind of keep that in mind, what we're going through for basically 2 years worth of U.S. consumption. There hasn't been a lot of analysis on what the economic impact is. This is about the only one that I've run across thus far, and that was given by DEC back in July. And they estimate about $64 million in landowner royalties and about $15 million local taxes. And that's probably a per year figure. And I suspect it might be even low now because the deals have been going up even since July. But even that being said, I would just caution people when it comes to estimating the economic impact, because the dollars, more than likely, only a fraction of those dollars will actually stay in this community. Why do I say that? Basically, well, there's certainly taxes on that, which go to all levels of government, to be sure. But then also, anything that's bought here, as you're probably aware, anybody who's up on economics, we live in a global economy now where very little dollars stay in the community anymore. It's usually siphoned off because the world is a global economy now. Tom Friedman, the world is flat. So any dollar spent in this community, only a fraction of that stays in this community. Also, anybody who gets this money in hand, they'll spend some of it, surely, but a lot of it will be invested. And there again, where people familiar with portfolios these days, a lot of it is spread out all over. You're actually encouraged to do that. As safe investing practices. And more of that is going overseas. You know, we gave all this money to the rich with the idea, tax breaks to the rich to essentially with the idea that they would invest money and create jobs. Well, guess what? They invested money all right, but a lot of it was invested overseas, and overseas jobs were created with all that. So much for the trickle-down theory of economics. But point being in this context is that though we talk a lot of money being floated around, it would be hard to say for sure exactly how much will stay in this community after all is said and done. This is becoming a more and more difficult topic to talk about because everybody's at different levels of understanding of what Marcellus Shale is all about. But briefly, what you see is the Marcellus Shale is that deposit that I just referenced. Has become part of a shale deposit. Actually, it's about 6,000 to 7,000 feet below the surface. Actually, rather deep as these things go, but has now, they've always known it was there, but now because of rising gas prices as well as new technologies, these deep shale deposits are beginning to become economically accessible. What's involved in getting at the Marcellus Shale? First of all, you create access roads. Then you create a pad. Typically 3 to 5 acre sites are created. And part of the process is creating a mud pond, which is basically just a hole dug out and lined with plastic. A drill rig, of course, is required. One thing to keep in mind, though, and I'll get further into this later, but the drill rig doesn't stay there forever. So just keep that in mind. But it's certainly, you can't miss it when it's going on, when the drilling is going on. And it typically takes about 3 to 4 months. This whole process takes 3 to 4 months to basically prepare the site. Drilling occurs in a very traditional fashion at first, basically boring with traditional drill bits down that length, 6,000 to 7,000 feet. In the process, it will be going through aquifers, water aquifers, and there is some effort to protect that groundwater as they bore through our drinking water supplies. Here it's shown, and I'll get into this a little in more detail in a bit as well, but typically there's definitely minimally steel casing surrounded by a concrete. Then comes kind of the new technology. It's called hydrofracking, and it's horizontal in nature. If you want to think of this is almost like high-pressure sandblasting, if you will. They take a mixture that's predominantly sand, actually, water, and certain chemicals, and basically sandblast horizontally through the deposit. And then, just to be clear, basically what they do is frack from that. And you'll hear it being said that fracking, even fracking, it's a new term to a lot of us, but fracking actually is something that's been going on for a long time as well. But before this time, the fracking has typically been from the vertical position. Other pieces of infrastructure certainly is the collection pipes that connect all these pads as they collect the gas and bring it down to main trunk lines, of which one is that goes right through. You may have heard the Millennium Pipeline is going right through Broome County, and this is scheduled to feed right into that trunk line. The other thing that's a part of the infrastructure that stays in place is the compressors that take the gas and pump it through the collector pipes. So that in a nutshell is what this whole process looks like schematically, if you will. What I want to do next is kind of lead you through what it looks like on the ground. Again, the drill site encompasses, for review, building the access road, clearing the site, bringing the drill equipment in, building that mud pond, bringing in water, a lot of it, and drilling the well, removing the waste, capping the well, digging the ditch for collection pipes, and connecting the compressors. Bringing the equipment to the site. This is big equipment, big equipment. And a lot of it is going to go along secondary roads or rural roads to get this equipment up to those sites. A lot of those roads just aren't equipped to handle that traffic. They weren't built for this type of traffic. And what you will typically see is, as you see here, is that's actually a bulldozer towing that piece of equipment, because the piece of equipment couldn't get up there on its own steam. And you might notice what it's doing to the roads. And here's another shot with that piece of equipment being towed up and what they've been doing to this road. And this isn't a road that they built. They build their own roads too. But you can tell that this is a local road because you can see the road sign by it. This is a local road and what they've done to local roads. This is a site all set to get going. Like I said, about 3 to 5 acres. Site preparation, again, here's the mud pond that was created here. A lot of trucks. Here's another configuration, and that's another thing I should mention. You know, they've been doing this out west for a while, but here is a little different terrain. And they're going to have to do a little different configurations to deal with the hillsides and so forth. This you could possibly see, this is terraced, and the mud pond is off to one side. Truck traffic. Takes about 45 trucks to just deal with the equipment, and then comes the real truck traffic. 600, estimated 600 water tank trucks of about 10,000 gallon capacity is needed for this drilling. And again, it's not so much for the vertical drilling, but the new horizontal drilling that they're talking about. And you can't take the waste from the site. When they use that drilling fluid, then it becomes mixed with all the stuff they bring up and all the chemicals that they use for the horizontal drilling. So that's basically waste fluids at that point. And they can't ship it out in the same trucks as they ship it in. So there's 700 different trucks leaving coming to and then leaving the site. Here's some pictures of the trucks just lining up, getting ready to go up there. A lot of truck traffic we're talking about. Here you could possibly see, there's the drill site. And here's trucks queued to get onto that site, with all the exhaust fumes and everything else just becoming part of the pollution of the project. Some shots of the mud ponds. Again, pretty simple design. Dig a hole, line it with plastic. And then the drilling begins. You can see the drill rig right in the center there. This is major construction. 24/7, like I say, 3 to 4 months, and they do it every day but Christmas, I'm told. But then, thankfully, at least that part is complete. If you can deal with, but also keep in mind that, okay, that's 3 to 4 months on one site, but then we're really dealing with multiple sites. So, and they'll stagger them going in. So you're going to deal with construction for a long period of time. But when it's done, it's capped off, not capped off, but what they put is what they call a Christmas tree. I think that's somebody's idea of a sick joke, but that's what they call it. And then compressors. And this is what sticks with you for a long, long time, many, many years. The compressors, they're about 10 feet high, and they're going 24/7. Typically diesel run. Diesel driven. I mean, they do attempt to put mufflers on it, as you can see up here, but these compressors you're living with for decades. What's it going to do to the landscape? These wells will be spaced about 6,000 to 7,000, under current regulations anyway. This is what they're envisioning. Like I said, the horizontal drilling goes out about 3,000 feet, so you're looking at a spacing of about 6,000 to 7,000 feet apart. These aren't residential homes. These are all drill sites. This obviously is not taken in this area, but this is probably out west somewhere. But what it will do to the terrain is pretty much the same. From a little higher up. Okay. This is something that I don't think a lot of people have gotten their head around yet. You know, what our landscape is going to be looking like once this gets into full bore, no pun intended. And like I said, it's going to be with us for quite some time, just the operations themselves, let alone how long it will take the land to recover after the fact. But these sites typically have a lifespan of 30 to 50 years. And then if that wasn't enough, actually they are re-drilled. They have to be re-drilled about 10 times on average, which means they're back about every 5 years, doing the whole process all over again. How do people typically respond to this? Well, I've kind of think about it probably in one of three ways. They oppose the gas drilling. They support the gas drilling. And you could probably find some people who could possibly tolerate the gas drilling if stipulations and safeguards were put into place. The gas drilling opponents, certainly the preservationists, I'll classify them as preservationists, people who value peace and tranquility over money. They value the beauty of the area. They're concerned about the destruction of a way of life. They practice what is typically known as land ethics, which values the land. A lot of your old-time farmers, older generation farmers, many of them kind of embody these land ethics. And they're concerned about the destruction of the community. You know, I live in a rural area, and there's it's kind of an unspoken rule where, you know, kind of a live and let live. If you can do what you want on your property as long as you're not in my face about it. The trouble is, this is very much in everybody's face. So it really has the potential of destroying the fabric of the community as it goes forward. It's a good way to get your neighbor mad at you, in other words. Certainly some environmentalists could be considered drilling opponents. These environmentalists would be concerned about such thing as habitat destruction, threats to the biodiversity that it might entail, certainly concerned about the health effects from all that, both short-term and long-term. And opponents ask kind of a fundamental question that quite often really isn't looked at. And they ask, well, why are we butchering our land to extract fossil fuels that release carbon sequestered over millions of years sequestering which made the planet habitable for humans in the first place? Kind of a big question that you have to kind of step back sometimes and ask ourselves, what are we really doing here? And that's a whole other topic, the whole global warming issue and what feeds into that. And this is certainly a part of it. I work on the national level of Sierra Club, and actually the National Sierra Club at this point in time supports gas drilling. And they support it for one reason. They say this is a good transition fuel. It's a fuel that is cleaner than a lot of the other fossil fuels, and it's what we need to transition to the next generation. Yet I think back and I challenge anybody to point to any time in history where we've deliberately taken one form of fuel and replaced it with another. My guess is this is just going to be additional fuel that we put out there. It's not going to replace any fuel. What about the drilling supporters? Well, certainly people who invest in land, and that's all they consider land as, is investments. And this is a big return on investment, okay? No question about it. Our area has actually quite a significant amount of absentee landlords, people who, landowners, people who like live in, down in New York. They've invested in this land up here for retirement or some such purpose. Point being is they don't live here, they're absentee. They might look at this and say, okay, I can get something out of this. I'll take the money and then go somewhere else for my peace and quiet and tranquility and beautiful area. There's certainly landowners out there, I know, who are just simply unaware of the consequences and right now support the gas drilling. Landowners who know the impacts sign the lease and leave the area. And I've talked to some of these. They say, you know, I'd be stupid not to take this deal that's put in front of me. I can just take it, take my money, and move elsewhere. Kind of take the money and run attitude. There are, and I think we need to be cognizant of this and be sensitive to it, there are desperate landowners out there, small farmers that have been just hanging on. Not as many as you might think, because actually, quite frankly, we've let the farming community die, basically, on the vine. So there is farming going on, basically more agribusiness now. And, but there are still small farmers just barely hanging on. And this is a way for them to save their land. And I think we need to be sensitive to that and at least understand where they're coming from. And there certainly are government leaders out there who see short-term gains, but are either ignore or unaware of the long-term consequences. So that's the gas drilling supporters. Then there's this other group that I've classified as they could tolerate gas drilling with stipulations and safeguards. Who would compose of that group? Well, certainly we have environmentalists that would fit into this category. Environmentalists who believe with the proper regulations, we can do this in a responsible manner and protect the environment as we go forward. There are people who see benefits, and there certainly are benefits, but they want to see long-term viability of the area protected. They want to see landowners' rights protected. They want to see landowners' liability reduced in the process. And they want to see landowners equitably compensated. You know, this play has been basically started as in typical fashion, kind of under the radar screen. That's the whole idea. The landmen want it under the radar screen because then they can strike the better deals that way. And they did strike some deals where people didn't really understand what they were sitting on top of. They put some money down on the table that looked good at the time, and they grabbed it. And now they're having some regrets in the process. But there's a whole equity an equitable issue here. And I think there's some ways we can address some of these concerns. And certainly there's government leaders who certainly, again, see the benefits of this development, but again, would want to be adequately compensated for the stress that this represents on the infrastructure. Currently, there's nothing really in place to kind of recoup monies that would address that. So that's something that we need to be working on. The protection of the health and welfare of their constituents, they're concerned about that, obviously. And economic development, but they want to preserve and understand that it's important to be done in such a way to preserve the long-term community viability of the area. Okay, so what are some of the issues that we might be looking at here and be concerned about and want to be addressed? Assuming, I'm just going to assume at this point, I'm not sure I can say anything that will appease the people who are completely against gas drilling. I probably have already said a few things that would disturb some people who are supporting gas drilling, but let's see what some of the issues are and what we might do to address it. Certainly there's concerns over where the water is drawn from. That's been a big issue that's hit the newspapers. Where's all this water going to come from? There's two water commissions that are basically in charge of this, the Susquehanna River Basin Water Commission and the Delaware River Basin Water Commission. And at first they talked tough, and then it looked like they were giving in. And then I think they finally realized that it's not just, they can't just take into account, well, what is one drilling operation draw? They got to figure that there's going to be multiple drilling operations going on, and what impact that has. I can remember not too many years ago, they were talking about special taxes on golf courses because they were concerned about golf course drawdown. So they ought to pay a little attention to this, it seems. Certainly, clearing all that land, and this is a whole other discussion of what this does when you clear land and how that impacts flooding potential in the area. We've gone through some serious flooding in the not too distant past. They say 100-year flood, so maybe we don't have to worry about it for another 100 years, but then again we might. So we need to be looking at this and what this does for our mitigation strategies concerning flooding. Cleared land reduces water retention capacity. Stress on the water treatment facilities. Now this is a kind of a looming issue, and is kind of put on the back burner for now only because we don't know what the heck we're dealing with these fluids. And that's almost the first step. We have to know what we're dealing with before we can determine whether we even have the capacity to treat the waste coming out of this and what we have to do to treat it. And the biggie, groundwater contamination. Can be a problem for many, many years. If we contaminate our groundwater, we're in serious trouble. So we need to be mindful of that and be vigilant about that. Like I said, there is some attempts to protect the groundwater. The gas companies are not unaware of the issue. And what is typically done is they will drill down only to a little ways past the aquifer, signified by this blue portion here. So they'll drill down, and then they'll put a casing down, and then back that casing up a little bit. So the hole is a bigger diameter, just hopefully people can kind of visualize this. The hole is bigger than the casing. They put the casing down and bring it back up. Then they start pumping cement down the casing, and they push it down with what they call a pig. It's just a device that pushes that concrete down with the idea that it goes down and starts coming up the sides, working its way up the sides to basically surround that casing in another layer of protection against the groundwater. Well, that's what they do to try to mitigate it, but that process has been known to cause problems on occasion. Certainly, as the whole process goes on, there have been times that the walls of that drill hole have collapsed and kind of mixed in with the cement as the cement is working its way up the hole. At times, there are voids in the earth that the cement actually goes out and fills that void, and they wouldn't even know it. They think they have a completed encasement, but a lot of that cement has simply gone and filled up a void instead. And this whole thing has a potential of honeycombing that concrete in such a way that the concrete itself actually becomes a pathway for exchanges between upper layers and lower layers and into the aquifer itself. There is, at times, they've experienced pipe corrosion, but not so much of that. There's an attempt, as I mentioned, to protect the groundwater when they're drilling. They create these mud ponds, and they line it with plastic. Why do they line it with plastic? To protect the groundwater. So when the drilling dregs come up, it goes into this pond. There's some evaporation from this pond, which is also somewhat of an issue. But more importantly, the integrity of that pond is crucial. And unfortunately, there have been times when those plastic liners have developed leak, either by poor seaming of the plastic in its install or accidentally getting punctured by this, that, or the other thing. So these ponds have been known to leak. In addition to that, especially in the low-lying areas, if we should happen to have a flood while this operation is going on, that would just fill up that pond, and all that waste would just simply go out and become part of the floodwaters. Another potential for problems. Less likely, at least I think, but some people disagree with me, is the leaking from the fracking process itself. Certainly, this is a new type of fracking, like I mentioned. Traditionally, fracking has gone laterally across the shale deposit. Fracking from the horizontal position has the potential of creating, again, pathways, destroying the integrity between the various levels of soils. So what are in these drilling dregs that I keep on referring to? Certainly mud and clay. And the ground stone, but that's almost the least of it. What is known down there already in this area, we know that there's metals, cadmium, arsenic, lead, and mercury. We already know is down there at certain levels. Hydrogen sulfide, we know is down there. Sulfuric acid and iron hydroxide. There's what is referred to as NORM, naturally occurring radioactive materials. Radon and such. Again, we know it's down there. Certainly brine. Brine is found just about everywhere, and we certainly could expect it here. And then we come to the frac fluids itself. Now, the frac fluids, like I mentioned, we actually aren't really sure all the components of these frac fluids. It's proprietary information at this point in time, patented, and the company that holds the biggest patent happens to be a company called Halliburton. And they must have friends in high places, because they have actually got exemptions from having to reveal what's in it, as well as exemptions from some basic regulations, which I'll go into in a bit. But suffice to say, they wouldn't go through all this problem to get all those exemptions if there wasn't some issues with the chemicals themselves. And if you think about it, what are we asking those chemicals to do? Certainly like I say, if you want to think of it as kind of high pressure sandblasting, certainly sand is in there, but the chemicals help to keep everything mobile so they can keep the fluids flowing. There's some functionality there. There's chemicals to kind of keep the spaces open as it's going through. This is a complex formula that we're dealing with. And then, of course, there's always the unknowns. We have a pretty good idea what's down there. We do drilling, borehole testing. There's a lot of actually radar detection to get a sense of what we have below us. But we can't say for sure we know everything of what's below us and what might be brought up in this process. So there is always the unknown. The natural gas itself, it's not pure natural gas. You might know coming out of the ground, that gas still has to be refined. It has contaminants in of itself. As known, contaminants are mercury, hydrogen sulfide, and again, that radon gas that I mentioned. The natural gas itself is comprised mostly of methane, but certainly ethane and propane and butane as well, in smaller amounts. That's the basic composition of the gas. And another thing to keep in mind, I mean, we could hope actually that there's some hydrogen sulfide in it, because then we at least be able to smell it. If we don't have anything like that in there, this could be odorless. It could work its way into people's homes, and they wouldn't know it until it hit a flame. And then it's too late. In fact, there have been instances where people have drawn off their tap and been able to light their tap water. I don't think that's normal. Pollution, dust and dirt, certainly during the drilling. I don't think it takes a lot to imagine how that could happen. But then there's ongoing dirt and dust that's basically just thrown up during normal wellhead servicing. The ambient air quality is perhaps even more of a concern, though. Certainly, again, during drilling, all those trucks, all that diesel, all those diesels going 24/7, the evaporation off the mud ponds, all that contributes to air quality degradation during the drilling process. But then there's ongoing. These sites have been known to just kind of give off ambient gas. It's not it's not a tight system that prevents gas from just wisping off of it. And then, of course, the compressors that I mentioned earlier. This is, like I say, diesel engines going 24/7. There's been studies that suggest that in areas that have been fully developed, that the air quality basically turns into something equivalent to a good-sized city, all the way along. And this area might be even more prone because of our valleys. We've been known for air inversions that keep pollution down in the valleys for a good long time and actually allow for buildup of air pollution at times. So it's an open question, but certainly one to be concerned about. And certainly noise, and again, obvious noise during the drilling, almost unbearable. What I've been told, people who've tried to live with it and simply had no idea what it was going to be like living next to these things as it was being drilled. But then, more often not thought about, though again it's just been mentioned in the paper recently with our own county attorney visiting some of these sites, and it was interesting that he came back almost his biggest impression was the ongoing noise of these sites. Now, here I'm going to show a little bit of bias, I suppose. My living out in a rural area, I'm going to say, maybe city dwellers, they're used to a little more noise than we are. Out in the country, believe me, you notice noise really easy. And it basically, for those of us who moved out there for the peace and quiet, this is going to basically kill that. Impact on infrastructure. These operations are basically accidents waiting to happen. And I'm not just using that as a scare tactic. They've been known to happen. And there's cases we can point to where it happens. Certainly chemical fires, gas eruptions, release of radioactive elements. Again, back to the natural occurring radioactive elements that are brought up during the process. The contamination of aquifers has happened. And all this, the stress on the emergency services, the fire emergency squads and hospitals, a lot of those fire and emergency squads are volunteers. Out in the rural area, we deal with volunteer emergency squads and fire services. So the stress that this represents to them can be considerable. And a lot of them don't have the equipment to deal with it either. So there again is something, if we're looking at this, if we want to go forward with this, we would want to, maybe as part of the quote deal, is to get some equipment in the hands of our emergency service people to deal with this. Here's a blowout. Just heard recently, there's one just down in Pennsylvania that they haven't, it's been going on for a few weeks now. They haven't been able to put it out. And these are actually harder to put out than oil fires. And this one might even be, this particular deposit might be even tougher yet because it's far down. That means more pressure. They got to deal with, this is high pressure gas release when things go wrong. This is just kind of an interesting tidbit that I ran across on a listserv, which I'll refer you to at the end. We have set up a Marcellus Shale listserv, and you'll have more information than you'll ever want to know. And just to be a little wary, I mean, anybody can post to that listserv, so you just got to kind of look at everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. But this kind of captured my attention because evidently this little country above Iran, I guess, Turkmenistan, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Evidently, back in 1961, the Russians were drilling for natural gas, and they were unaware of a cavern underneath, and the whole thing collapsed. And it caught on fire, and this thing has been burning, and it's about 100 meters in diameter, and this thing has been burning since 1961. They call it the Gates of Hell, and it's actually become a tourist attraction. So maybe that's what we can look forward to here. If all else fails, we can create our own Gates of Hell. Okay. Anyway, moving on. I'm not saying I mean, hopefully we know a little better than the Russians did. But there again, I mean, again, going down to Pennsylvania, I hate to pick on poor Pennsylvania, but they're well known for a coal vein that has been on fire since, 1971. They had to evacuate a whole town, move a whole town, and that's been going. So it's not inconceivable. We shouldn't be too pompous about it. Anyway, back to impact on infrastructure. That's a paved road. And then, of course, I showed you earlier this secondary road and the impacts on that, especially in the low-lying areas. And then our bridges, big concern actually, because again, our roads, our rural roads, they use culverts. They have some nice stone bridges. If you ever take a stroll out in the rural areas, and you're lucky enough to come on just these beautiful, quaint stone bridges. But bottom line is these bridges were not built to handle this traffic that we're suggesting that be used. So we need to be thinking about that. And it's not inexpensive to replace bridges. Let's put it that way. So economic impacts, certainly the threat to the landscape. I hope if anything else you leave from here is that sense now maybe that what it's going to be doing to our landscape and how that might impact tourism. I mean, this is a beautiful place, and again, I'm reflecting my bias here, but my feeling is this is a beautiful place to live and work. We're blessed with 5 rivers that come together and in a very short span length of and distance, and the valleys that has etched, and yeah, I could go on and on. I'm high in this area, and kind of saddened that this might be butchered. Certainly the threats to the agriculture and the hunting and the fishing. Again, what this area is known for and it's attracted. And it's part of our economy, kind of a niche economy, but there nonetheless. Certainly the agriculture is still a big one. Threats to land value. Now, I say that in the context of, certainly you get money from royalties and lease agreements, but on the other hand, you're left with land that's been degraded. The land itself, at the end of the day, is less value. And the high infrastructure costs that really hasn't been calculated up until this point. And at this point, there is no mechanism of which for local governments, especially to capture this. This is something we're working on, because it seems like, if nothing else, we need to be assured that any impact on infrastructure and the roads needs to be compensated for, because otherwise it just amounts to we're all going to be paying for it through our taxes. And it's then it becomes just kind of a subsidy to the energy companies. Yeah. Because it's a consequence of their actions, but they haven't paid for it, so then we're basically subsidizing it when we don't recover it. And then simply, and this might be pertinent to people in this audience especially, the threats to attracting young workers to this area. Will people want to live here once the landscape is dotted with these wells, and the air and the water is impacted in negative ways? So I come finally to what I call regulation, or why some people don't trust their government to protect them. I kind of alluded to this earlier. Again, because Halliburton must have friends in high places, they've basically got all this operation exempted from the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the Stormwater Rules, and the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is the only industry that is allowed by EPA to inject hazardous chemicals into areas adjacent to underground drinking water. But it doesn't stop really at the federal level. Our own New York State has basically passed laws that enable DEC to overrule the local zoning and land use planning. DEC, if my recollection is correct, actually pressed for land use planning, good land use planning. We go through all this trouble to plan where we want industrial development, housing, and small businesses. There's kind of a science to it, and part of the philosophy is to make sure that people aren't stuck living next to an industrial site, for instance. Well, guess what? DEC admits that this is an industrial activity, and basically what they're doing is throwing all that out. They can override any local zoning law that's in place. They've recently imposed a law that actually forces landowners into becoming part of what they call spacing units that's created whether the landowner wants to be a part of it or not. So, and actually landmen have used this as kind of a pressure tactic. They basically go in and say, you know, you can take the deal we're offering you, or we're going to come in and take that gas anyway, and you're not going to get as good a price for it, by the way. And that line of quote salesmanship has been used over and over again. And one of the things, just as a preview of my list, is one of the things we're asking for actually is that the landmen actually have to be licensed, because currently anybody can be a landman at this juncture. The other piece of legislation that just got passed recently that basically was designed to fast track this whole industry, and it got very little legislative review. You talk to legislators afterwards, and of course now they're a little more up on the topic, but they claim not to have known too much about this legislation, even though they passed it. But the one thing that did come out of this, just as an aside, this was a piece of legislation that was sat on the governor's desk for a number of weeks. And we actually tried to, a number of groups actually tried to stall the whole process. That was not to be, but kind of the deal that was struck with the governor's office, at least, was that he basically said that he's not going to go forward. DEC is not going to go forward with any of this stuff in terms of issuing licenses and permits and so forth until a full environmental impact statement is done on this process. So that in an area that not known for a lot of victories here as of yet, we at least got that one. Now where that goes, because I've been in government a long time, and I know you can make environmental impact statements say whatever you want it to say. So now it becomes the task of keeping that process honest. Not a small feat. Okay, mitigation measures. This is kind of brainstorming, and I'm actually open. Every meeting with groups I meet with is I ask for adding to the list, because I won't claim, and we won't claim to have thought of everything. Certainly, as I mentioned, performing the environmental impact statement, we got that. We suggest it might be a good idea to have pre and post testing of air and water quality. The issue here is, of course, that if you come in after the fact and you say, oh, my water's been contaminated, or my air is, I can't breathe anymore, it's just too easy to say, well, you know, it may or may not be as a result of this activity. Prove it. You know, what was it like before? And if you don't have anything that shows what you were dealing with before, you have a tough time making your case. So that's why it would be important to have these tests done prior to the activity and then after the fact. As we deal with frac fluids, and here we might have another victory, actually. New York State took a very interesting tack. They can't override the federal government that says, you know, the companies are exempt from revealing what's in their frac fluids. But New York says, okay, fine, you don't have to, but if you want a permit, you're going to have to tell us. So, I mean, that's what they're saying to us in meetings, and at this point I have no reason to doubt their sincerity that that's what's going to happen. The next little battle was, well, maybe we won't tell anybody else. But then with a little more pressure, they've allowed for the fact that, well, if they're expecting treatment plants, water treatment plants to deal with this stuff, they got to know what they're treating. So probably the best we're going to be able to do here is components but not percentages. And that will probably be as close as we get to a real full divulsion of what's in those frac fluids. But even as we talk about that, there is some people that advocate maybe we shouldn't be dealing with such high corrosive fluids, and maybe there's some other fluids that might be more benign to the environment, and maybe we should be looking at that and requiring those types of fluids to be used here. And then there's also a process known as recirculation. You know, we talked about all those trucks coming in and all that waste going out. But if they developed, if they had instituted a process where they're basically using the same fluids over and over again, just recovering those fluids and water and basically recycling it, that would reduce significantly the amount of truck traffic going in and out of those sites. Another thing that's been talked about is requiring steel tanks for the drilling dregs. You know, thanks very much for trying to protect our groundwater with those ponds, but that's not good enough. Closed tanks would be even better. Let's look at those. Sight and sound buffers. It's possible, but they won't do it unless they're required. So let's require it. Light pollution has been mentioned as a possibility. They like to keep those sites lit for vandalism reasons, you know, perfectly legitimate reasons. But that's a form of light pollution. Is there ways that we can cut down on that? More focused lighting, what have you. Spacing, and here's a big one. The shocker, and we've been talking about this spacing of a mile or so. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that a lot of this is done in New York State and a lot of other states because it's all private landowners. They have to piece things together. Up in Alaska, it's a different story. Alaska has drilling, the state coordinates all the gas and oil drilling up there. And what they do is try to make the technology work for them. They try, rather than rejecting the technology, they embrace the technology. And I'm just throwing this out there that this is a strategy that we might want to do as well. Rather than fight it, embrace it and make it work for us. And one of the ways we could make it work for us is using horizontal drilling to reduce the number of pads created. In other words, do more work underground rather than on top of the ground. The record horizontal drilling is 8 miles, and I don't know what the theoretical level is. It's more than that. It's more than 8 miles. But we know you can drill at least 8 miles horizontally. So why not use that to our advantage and make the spacing? And that would reduce the, I mean, just do the math and how that would reduce the impact, how many spaces, how many pads you have to create, and space them 16 miles as opposed to a mile. Something to be considered. Emission controls and carbon offsets. You know, we're putting more fossil fuels on the market by using this fuel source. We should be looking at carbon offsets to counteract that. Raise fees, if nothing else, to cover the oversight. DEC at this point is ill-equipped to handle this type of operation. And actually, we might have some allies with the industry itself on this one, because DEC says, you know, we're not going to rush this, but if it takes forever to process these things, it's actually to the industry's advantage to beef up DEC's capacity to deal with it. Road maintenance agreements, where we would put money aside for rebuilding roads and the damages that go along with it. Basically, overall accountability. That's all that anybody's really asking for here, accountability for your actions. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the licensing of landmen, so we could perhaps have a little more control about what is being said. If a person faces the possibility of losing a license and can't practice anymore, there might be a little better dealings with the landowners. So that's kind of our list at this point. And again, I'm open to suggestions of what we might also add to that list, but all we're saying is let's do it right. We need to be concerned about the long-term viability and sustainability of our area. And these are the two resources that I've suggested. I already suggested one, the Marcellus Gas Google Group listserv. Again, just with a caveat, there's a lot of stuff out there that you just got to take what you see out there with a little grain of salt. And then we are in the process of developing our own site, but currently we spin off of City of Binghamton's website to post some of the documents that we've been working on.